In no way whatsoever do we accept responsibility for the quality of construction, safety of this project, or anything that might result from the use of this product. The complete responsibility depends on you, the person building it. It is your decision on how to build it. The video is only a guide.
Down to the transaxle. The transaxle has a large diameter pulley on it, and there's a small diameter pulley on the engine. Okay, that makes the vehicle go slow. If you want to change the speed, you want to change the pulleys. So you put a larger diameter on the engine and a smaller diameter on the transaxle, and it will go faster. Okay, this is the transmission brake. It's a disc type of brake, works very well at low speeds, but is a little limited on the high speeds of the low mower or pro street mower, depending on how fast you want it to go. If you're going faster, we have our own design brake that we use that works very well for this application. This is the steering mechanism here, which will be taken off and turned around and used with the correct leverage for running the front steering mechanism. Okay, so what you want to do now is you want to loosen all the bolts, take two of them out, leave two of them in relatively loose, but so that it's easy to get at, and disconnect the brake, the clutch, remove the pulley, all the stuff that you have to work on down here you want to get done now. Then what we'll do is we'll set the mower back down, remove the engine, tip the unit over, and remove all the rest of the parts. Okay, so now that you have everything loose where it's easy to work on, you've taken off the steering mechanisms and everything else, now we'll flip it back down and remove the engine. Just got to be careful. Put your foot here and just simply let it come down. Okay, we got the bolts loose. We just finished loosening them with our fingers. Every once in a while you have to use a wrench. Okay, there we go. Engine is relatively heavy, so you might want to have a friend help you lift this off. With the pulley and everything off, it should come right off. This unit is nice because the gas tank is built right on it and it's plastic. It's safer that way. But you have to be very careful that you don't spill any gasoline because there can be extreme fire hazard with that. So always be careful with gasoline. And you just pick the engine off and set it in the corner. If the engine needs to be rebuilt, you can get a Chilton's manual from the library and rebuild it. Most likely for the amount you're going to drive it, you won't need to rebuild the engine. But that's, depends on what condition it's in. Okay, now we're going to remove the grill piece, which, like I said before, you can use for your rear deck lid depending on the application. And that's just simply removable like that. I use it for the rear deck lid on the lawnmower by just turning it around like that. Very neat, huh? Okay. Now, we're going to flip the lawnmower over and get it in its normal running position. Remove the running boards and basically almost get ready for the reassembly. Oh, come back here, boy. This can be tricky, so you don't want to let it get away from you. Okay, so now you got it flipped over, and this is basically what it's going to look like. There's 4 bolts that hold the front suspension on. We have 3 of them removed, and you just have to remove the last pivot bolt here. And the whole front end comes right off. This normally was made to pivot through the pivot point right here. Normally this axle can pivot for going around the lawn and stuff. We are going to have it welded on solid, so it's solid suspension. In our application, that's actually better for the type of driving that we'll be doing. That's why we're doing it that way. What you do is, we also need a wider stance, so we're going to cut the axle in half and widen it approximately 2.5 inches. We'll get the specific measurements later depending on the exact application. You have to do your own measuring. Some units you might want them wider, some units might be a little bit less. It depends on your particular application. But basically what you do is you just cut it in half, widen it about 2.5 inches, weld a piece of sheet metal in there, and then weld it on the front end, basically just like this. You might want to extend it. You know, if you're a bigger person, you have longer legs, it's simple to just get some sheet metal and extend the front end. In most applications, you can weld it right onto the front end of the vehicle, and you're done. As you can see, a lot of people don't know this, but this is the angle of your kingpins. This is the kingpin right here. And this angle is supposed to form a line that ends up in the center of the tire on the bottom. So, as you can see this line here, if you drew a line from the top of this kingpin through the bottom of it, it should have a point right in the center of the tire. That's your kingpin angle. And that makes your tires turn properly so that it pivots right on the center of the tire. Okay? And that's engineered into the lawnmower so that it will turn more efficiently and better. Okay. You can see that when we turn the axle upside down, like we're going to do to give us our lower stance, that the angle of the kingpin comes out down here, which is totally incorrect. And the normal person would think, well, since it's totally incorrect, it won't work. Well, 2 wrongs do make a right. It will still work. But I want you to understand the principle of operation. Even though it's not supposed to work, it will work. The reason it does work is because it's a light vehicle. You're not driving 100,000 miles. If you tried doing this on your automobile, it would wear the tires out in a short period of time and would not handle well due to the weight of the vehicle. So, kingpin inclination, or the angle of the kingpin, is not really important. I just want you to understand how it works. So it comes out, pivot point is down here. The pivot point is supposed to be under the center of the tire. And also there's a certain amount of caster that's built into the unit. That makes it turn better, makes it go straight better, at high speeds. A little hard to explain at this point in time. Okay. Now we're going to remove the running boards. We've already disconnected several of the bolts. These are really nice running boards because you can use them on your lawnmower. Almost all the parts are interchangeable with the lawnmower or your Pro Street mower, so it makes buying excess parts not necessary. Cross member, we're going to use the same cross members, but we're going to widen them because we're going to widen the running boards. Okay, easily removable. They just come right off, simply like that. They're going to end up out about here, so you're actually going to move them out approximately 3 inches, depending on your application. And the brake unit used to be down here. Worked fine. All you got to do is flip it up here. Works just as fine. Very simple application. First, we're going to summarize what we've done over the weekend. Then we're going to go over each specific part and show you exactly how we did it so it can be easily done by you when you have the time. One of the more technical things to do is the rear deck lid. It's actually very simple. All you have to do is split the rear deck lid and widen it 9 inches. Then we countersink for the seat area. You have to get new sheet metal for this, which you can get at your body shop or at the hardware store. We prefer to use 16 gauge so it doesn't warp too much and yet it's still easy to work with. That's 16 gauge sheet metal for countersinking the seat. Okay, then you want to make up some cross members for the frame. They are made out of 1.5 by 12 3/4 inch flat iron, preferably 1/4 inch, but you can use 3/16. And you make up 4 of these. One goes where the rear cross member goes for the running boards. One goes where your rack and pinion steering is, and 2 of them go for the engine mounts. That holds the body together, frame, and gives you more strength and rigidity in your frame. You can make these up ahead of time. We'll go over this rear deck lid specifically later. Then you have the cross members that come with the mower that you cut and reuse. You cut them off so they're 4 inches extended from the side of the frame, which will leave you an extra 5-inch piece on the inside that you can use to double up for your rear mount for your running boards, because there's more weight on that. This is the rack and pinion steering. This is the rack, this is the pinion. You have to remake that. This is an important part, and it's very critical that you do this correctly so that the steering does not break when you're driving it. And we'll go over that. It's a safety factor, and you want to make sure you do this part right. This is your drag arm that's hooked to the pitman arm off the steering. This is extended to 11 inches. Then we'll go to the front end. The front axle has been widened 3 inches. We use a piece of 4-inch 16 gauge, overlap at a 1/2 inch on each side, and re-weld the front axle together. We put a bead of weld across the front, which we'll grind down so it looks better. We cut and splice the front tie rod. This is the tie rod. Okay, now we're going to show you how to remove the steering mechanism. This can be a little difficult if you don't know how. That's why I'm going to show you the trick that's involved. This bushing is hard to get off. Okay, if you bend the tab on it, it's easy to get off. You just have to know where the tab is. There's a little notch right back here, a tab and a notch, that holds this bushing in place. All you have to do is take a vice grips, clamp it on like this, and bend it back, and that will release this bushing. Then you can take and get the bushing, a little bit of wiggling, the bushing will come out. And then it will simply come apart like that. See, this little tab right here holds the bushing in. You just bend it back, and then the bushing will come out. Now you can take it apart simply like that. And it comes right out. We will end up later on cutting this off, and I'll show you how to do that, but that's in a later step. Now we're going to go over the specific differences between the new steering mechanism and the old one. All you have to do with the old one to convert it is to cut off the pitman arm at the bottom, cut off the universal joint at the top, and cut off the end plate right here. Then re-weld the top plate on here and re-weld the pitman arm that is cut off at 1 7/8 inches to the center of this hole, and re-weld it onto the rack. This is a very critical weld because if this breaks while you're driving, you'll have no steering. So that is very important to do that correctly, and we'll show you some specific details. This is one of the most critical welds on the whole vehicle. This is the weld of the pitman arm onto the rack. The reason that this is a critical weld is because if it does break, you will not have any steering and you could crash. The other reason it's a critical weld is because this is a special piece of metal. This piece of metal is not cast iron and it's not regular plate steel. This metal was pressed out of powdered metal into a die at an extremely high pressure. It was like granular metal that was compressed really tight into make one precision piece. A lot of gears are made this way because you can make a precision gear and not have to machine it, and it's cheap and it's economical and it works good. But it is difficult to weld to because there's oil in the metal. So what we have to do is we have to burn the oil out of the metal before you can weld it. Otherwise, it will have porosity or holes in your weld. So we're going to weld this piece on like this. We cut this off so it's 1 7/8 from the center to the end of this. We beveled the piece so that we can get more surface area to weld. And we ground off the bottom of it so that it'll clear the head of this bolt, which we also ground down. See how it just barely clears that? And then it's welded on just like this. You want a large surface area of welding so that it's stronger. Okay, now we're going to do, I'm going to show you. Hopefully you'll be able to see it on camera. You'll be able to see the oil actually boil out of the metal. We'll do a little experiment with a torch. First, you'll see condensation of water on the metal, and then you should be able to see the oil actually boil out of the metal. See it coming out? See this dark stuff? That dark stuff coming out there is the oil in the metal. And you want to boil that out so that you can weld it properly. Actually see the oil coming off the metal. See the oil that's coming off the metal? It's dripping right out of the metal. It's dripping right out of the metal. Okay, you can tell by all the smoke that there's oil right in there. Okay, we're going to let this cool down, and then we're going to weld this piece on like this. You want to weld it on perpendicular to the axis. We're going to set that up to weld that right now, and then we'll be done. Okay, as you can see, we have completed the weld on the pitman arm. We radiused it out and filled in the fillet. It was ground down, and now it's all filled in. You can finish grinding a little bit of the rough stuff off. As you can see, there's no porosity in the weld. Porosity is when you have oil in the weld. So this unit is basically completed now. You can still see where the oil has come out of the metal. So this piece is done now. The next piece we have in the steering department is the tie rods. To weld the tie rods together, you want to taper the ends down so that you can get 100% penetration on the weld. And then you put them in a V-block so that you can get them lined up perfectly, clamp them, and then when you weld them with your wire feed welder, you can get the weld right into the center, weld one half on the top, let it cool, turn it over, weld the other half, and it should be straight. If it's not perfectly straight, you can grind it down and bend it straight later, but it should be very close to being straight. One of the things you're going to want to do with the tie rods is to tighten up the ends. They're probably wore out and have a certain amount of slop in them. All you have to do to tighten them up, instead of buying new ones, is take and set them on a heavy table and take a hammer and hit them on the end. That will force this metal down here and crimp it at this part and make this a tighter joint so that there's no slop in it. That's all you have to do, is just hammer it down. Save, when you're taking it apart, these are special nuts. They're locking nuts. They have little dents in them so they don't unscrew automatically, and they're fine threaded. So whenever you're taking the steering control rods off, you want to keep the nuts with these bolts because they're special. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to weld this together. All the joints are the same. You just weld it together with a wire feed welder, grind it off, turn it, weld it. You weld all the joints together, and you have your steering completed. Okay, now we're going to cover a few safety tips on the cutoff saw and a few of the items that we're going to be working on. It's very important to wear safety glasses whenever you're cutting or grinding any material. You only get one set of eyes, and you don't want to lose them. And if you do have to go to an eye doctor to get a piece of metal out of your eye, it's going to cost you at least $50, if not $150. So just from an economical standpoint, wear your glasses. You can get a good set of safety glasses for $5 or $6. Wear them. And also wear gloves whenever you're grinding in case you slip off and you hit your finger on the grinder, you'll burn off your glove instead of your hand. Always wear safety gloves and safety glasses. Okay, we made a set of V-blocks for cutting off small pieces with the cutoff saw. If you want to cut something off, you can cut off just a little bit of the end, and it works real good for holding small pieces. That's a V-block. It works real handy for welding things together, as we showed before, and also for cutting things off. If you want to cut a piece of metal off in a cutoff saw, you can put it in like this and cut it, or you can put it in like this and cut it. This is the proper way. You want to cut it as thin as possible. A cutoff saw works by cutting thin metal, not thick metal. If you cut a piece of thick metal like this, it will build up on the blade and will not cut properly. So whenever you cut like your cross members off, cut them off this way. Okay, we are now going to cut our axle, our front axle, in half. And we just cut it right down the middle. A simple cut. Put it in lengthwise like this. Line it up. You might want to wear earplugs when you're doing this. And you just simply cut it off. As you can see, sometimes the blade's not deep enough to make the cut all at once. You can just simply turn the piece upside down, or you can turn it this way, in this case, and cut it just like this. Now we'll make an extension, a 4-inch piece to overlap this, and weld these back together in the other shop. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to show the welding of the front axle. What we have done is we split it and moved it 3 inches wider than it originally was, and we're going to splice it back together. We're going to square it up and weld in our splice. First thing you want to do is get it level on your welding table. So we have a 16 gauge piece of metal under the center, 16 gauge piece of sheet metal under each side. We square it with a square so that we know it's going to come around square. We square the axle, the yardstick, metal yardstick, to make sure that's square. And we double check our distance at 3 inches, top and bottom. If everything's square, everything should be equal. Then we are going to weld it on the inside, and then we'll just bend the metal around, all the way around, tack it from the inside a little bit, and then finish weld it from the outside. Okay, we're going to weld it, and we'll come back as soon as we're done welding it.